What's the craziest thing you've overheard on a plane? Story 1. Not something I overheard, but something semi-interesting nonetheless. I once went and got sushi with my mom, and I noticed a guy and a girl at another table very clearly on their first date. They were both dressed very nicely, a lot of awkward laughter. The guy was being ultra gentlemanly, like pulling her chair out for her. You know, just the usual stuff that tips an observer off that they were still very much getting to know each other and wanting to make a good impression. Fast forward 2.5 years. I was boarding a plane in Atlanta, Georgia, heading to Colorado with my brother to go skiing when I saw the same couple seated near the back of the plane. I was in the row directly in front of them, so when I put my bag up, I turned to them and said, "This is going to be super weird, but did you guys have your first date at insert sushi restaurant?" They both got wide-eyed in shock and laughed and told me they had, in fact, had their first date there. I told them I was there that night and just happened to recognize them when I boarded the plane. It was friendly and we chit-chatted for a bit. They were going skiing at the same place we were, so it was cool and all. Day 2 of our trip, my brother and I decided to go to the top of the mountain and take a few of the more advanced slopes down to the bottom. There were maybe a dozen or so people up there, and before taking off, we decided to look at the trail map to make sure we were going to get back to where the shuttle could pick us up without having to hike our gear for 2 miles. About 20 feet away from us, a guy got down on one knee and proposed to his girlfriend, and everyone clapped as she jumped up and down with excitement and said, "Yes!" They took off their helmets and goggles to kiss, and it was the same freaking couple. I literally was there for their first date, met them for the first time on a plane purely by chance because I was sitting in front of them, and was present when he proposed to her. I assume they're still married because at the rate we're going, I'm probably going to run into them again if one of them decides to file for divorce. You'll probably coincidentally be at the hospital at the same time the wife arrives to have their first child. And when they make a movie about this, the main character's name will be Miles Tone. That's a pretty cool story. Perhaps you're all quantumly entangled, so you'll keep running into them at further stages in their life. Unfortunately, what you don't realize is in a prior existence, you were madly in love with one of them and pledged to find them in their next life. While you have accomplished your vow, they're unaware of your prior life together, and that hidden part of yourself that knows of your past life is being slowly driven insane by constantly running into them, but not being able to get the waking you to do anything about expressing your true feelings. Sucks. This reminds me of the story of Wilmer McLean. On July 18, 1861, Confederate General Beauregard had sat down for supper in the home of a Manassas local when a cannonball pierced through the house and landed in the kitchen fireplace. It was something of a surprise, but not so overwhelming as to ruin Beauregard's sense of humor. A comical effect of this artillery fight was the destruction of the dinner of myself and staff by a Federal shell that fell into the fireplace of my headquarters at the McLean House. He wrote in his diary, "Perhaps the shell would have been more of a shock had it not been just one of the many volleys in the first major campaign of the Civil War, the Battle of Bull Run. The house belonged to a man named William McLean, who had purchased the property in 1854. Beauregard had commandeered the property and McLean's well-situated house and barn as his headquarters, and later as a hospital for Confederate troops. McLean was happy to oblige the general as he himself was a retired officer in the Virginia militia and had profited nicely off of renting the property and speculating on commodities like sugar. But by the time the Second Battle of Bull Run had occurred on his doorstep and a pregnant wife, McLean had had enough. The profits no longer outweighed the dangers, and he decided to move south. In 1863, Wilmer McLean settled on the property surrounding the Two Rain Tavern at a small and quiet crossroads over 100 miles south of the chaos of Civil War battlefields. For 2 years, his family lived in the relative quietude of Southern Virginia until on April 9, 1865, Charles Marshall, General Robert E. Lee's aide, approached him. Marshall asked McLean to show him a place that was suitable for Lee and another general to meet. McLean first showed him a dilapidated home, but when Marshall rejected it, McLean reluctantly offered up his own residence for the meeting. Marshall accepted. Lee arrived at McLean's Appomattox courthouse property at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon in a crisp uniform. Shortly after, wearing his muddied field uniform, the other general arrived. It was Ulysses S. Grant. For about 25 minutes, the two spoke in McLean's parlor until eventually Lee brought up the purpose of their meeting, the surrender of the Confederate Army. Minutes later, the Civil War ended. Such it is that the Civil War started in William McLean's kitchen and ended in his parlor. I'm trying to think back to my life of anybody I may have run across like this, at the beginning of something and close to the end of something or in the middle of something that I may have only seen once or twice. I can't really think of anything myself. Have you ever had a situation like that where you've ran across someone at the beginning of something only to run into them in the middle or at the end of it? Story 2. Not that crazy as such, but when literally about to touch down, a lady got up and started walking urgently toward the bathroom. The cabin crew immediately started saying, "Madam, we're about to land. You have to sit down." The lady responded by screaming in a panic, "I'm gonna poop myself." They allowed her to continue. I was recently on a flight where about 45 minutes before landing, long international flight, I got up to pee and overheard a flight attendant say one of the bathrooms had been occupied for a while. As we were about to land, I heard the flight attendant say, "Sweetie, I can get you a ginger ale and we're about to land. Just hold on tight." I was on a flight once that was almost nothing but turbulence. I think we were flying through weather. I was already incredibly susceptible to motion sickness, so I was curled up in the window seat of the last row with the barf bag in front of my face, with a lady in the aisle seat glancing at me nervously every few minutes. I hear the announcement that we're starting our descent, and I'm like, OMG, thank the deities. I think I can make it without barfing. Literally, the wheels touch the tarmac, and I lose it. It's barf time. A flight attendant comes up to me shortly after and is like, "Well, at least you made it all in the bag." I barfed in a lot of exciting places, incredibly skillfully if anyone wants more stories. I would 100% be that lady nervously staring every few minutes. My biggest fear on airplanes isn't me getting sick, it's seeing other people getting sick. And I would absolutely not be able to look away. Oh, man, same. It's never happened to me on a flight, but my wife's experience traumatized me by proxy. I am emetophobic to the extreme. Trigger warning, gross. If reading descriptions of air sickness squeaks you, stop here. Oh boy. When we were still long distance, she was traveling from the U.S. to the U.K. to see me, about 8 hours. She was sitting next to a man who, from the very get-go, looked pale and sweaty. He was adjusting the overhead fan, breathing deeply, etc., and it was obvious he was feeling unwell. When the flight attendant came around with drinks, he ordered a cup of orange juice, drank some of it, and then suddenly vomited orange juice back into the cup, all over the tray and down his shirt, with my poor wife trapped in the seat next to him. The flight attendant rushed back and helped him clean up, but the worst part is she offered him a change of shirt, and he refused, saying he was fine. So my wife had to sit next to this guy with barf down his front for the rest of the flight. The most bizarre part was that he apparently felt fine now and ordered food when the time came. My wife, bless her, couldn't eat at all. Orange juice still makes her feel queasy to this day. Oh, no. I would not feel comfortable like that. I would just bring sleep, one of those sleep masks or something for my eyes and just try to take a nap, maybe see if I couldn't smell anything. That was probably the only time I would probably justify bringing like VR goggles with me on a trip so I could just really escape the reality I was in at that moment. Story 3. I sat in front of a kid, 12 to 13, and his older sister, who I assume was his guardian. It was a cross-country flight, and the kid was casually talking about how he had never flown before, and he's looking forward to it. He seemed likely on the spectrum a bit. It's pretty wholesome so far. Then the plane starts to move, and he instantly freaks all the way out, screaming, "We're all going to frackin' expire! Let me off this plane! It's a frackin' coffin! You're all going to pass away! It's going to be a fracking fireball!" etc. The stewardess comes by and tries to calm him down. The sister is talking to him in English and Spanish, trying to get him to relax, telling him he's embarrassing her. She's never taking him to Puerto Rico if he keeps acting like this. The guy in front of me turns around and loudly offers the kid Xanax. Finally, the hero of the story, a big southern black lady, says, "James," not his name, "honey, I'm going to need you to calm down, sweetie, because you're making all the rest of us real nervous now, okay?" Eventually, and for no noticeable reason, the kid relaxes and starts talking about how cool flying is. Like a switch, he starts looking out the window saying things like, "Wow, the view is really cool. I feel safe now. Everything is okay after all." Audible collective sigh of relief. Where was his sister flying him to? Astronaut camp. I think about him every time I fly. One day I would like the confidence that must be required to openly offer strangers, especially kids, prescription medicine. It was the prescription medicine that gave him the confidence. Oh, or it was just desperation. Where was his sister flying him to? Astronaut camp? 25 years into the future. That young man has actually accomplished his goal of becoming an astronaut. He's suited up and buckled in for his first manned mission to Mars. As the nation watches the live event in awe, the countdown reaches 1. Soon after takeoff is announced, we hear, "We're all going to frackin' expire! Let me off this shuttle! It's a frackin' coffin! You're all going to expire! It's going to be a frackin' fireball!" 10 out of 10 twist. That's because older black ladies know how to make anyone feel better. My day is always better if an older black lady calls me honey or sugar. Sounds like he accepted the offered Xanax. I don't know if I've ever seen anyone just switch so quickly like that in this kind of a situation, whether it's being driven or flying or what. I've heard some people have to be calmed down if they got nervous on a flight, but never this light switch 180 like that. Story 4. I was flying to Seattle from Atlanta, and there was a baby crying for the majority of the flight. The parents were doing their best, and it really was not their fault. Just an awful situation. About halfway to Seattle, the man seated in front of the baby snapped and started screaming at the baby and his parents, cursing at them, saying how they're awful parents and he's gonna beat them all, including the baby, to a pulp when they land. A flight attendant tried to ask the guy to calm down and said he would also beat her up. The pilot had to come on and tell everyone to calm down, or else we had to make an early landing. We made it to Seattle, and the guy ended up having to be tackled by 4 cops at the gate because he was trying to run away after being approached by them. I was on a flight that had a similar thing happen. Some business dude snapped, stood up, and yelled at the parents to shut the kid up. You could immediately feel the vibe of 20-plus people being ticked off at the business dude. A big biker dude stood up behind him and calmly explained how the babies can't equalize the pressure in their ears like adults can and are in pain the entire time. After explaining it, he told him to shut the hell up and sit down. And he did. My dad likes to tell the story of the time a businessman snapped on a crying baby during a flight, and a grandma passenger simply said, "You were a baby too once." I always remembered how simple and impactful that was. She didn't yell or curse, but she got that point across so forcefully. 30 years later, that man is going to find the baby all grown up on a plane and become an "I think you should leave" sketch. Story 5. 2 older guys in my row on the way to an academic conference. One of them mentions that the first thing he's doing is attending a lecture on some esoteric physics topic. But before he can even finish the name of the topic, guy number 2 says, "Oh, of course, the effects of co-limited tesseracts on quantum membrane string interactions," or some such physics jargon. Are you familiar with the topic? Guy 1 gets halfway through saying, "Well, actually, before he is cut off by Guy 2 who says, "Because you see, most people, even in the field, are woefully undereducated on this particular subject," and then proceeds to talk Guy number 1's head off for about 10 minutes. Guy number 1 just nods and smiles patiently through the whole exchange. At the end of his missive, Guy number 2 says, "So, the lecture is being given by Dr. So-and-so, one of the leaders in the field, an absolute legend. Do you know his work?" And of course, Guy number 1 puts on a very kind but somewhat sheepish look and says, "Actually, I am Professor So-and-so. Your understanding of the field is actually quite good." Guy number 2 turns red as a tomato for a few seconds, but seemed to get over it quickly, and they spend the rest of the flight casually talking shop about theoretical physics. I did this once. I was at some kind of linguistics or artificial intelligence conference that was general enough that you never really knew who might know what. Met a nice man at end-of-day drinks who asked me what my talk would be about. I spent like 5 minutes explaining what formal learnability theory was to situate my topic. He waited until I was done before he said that he, too, had done a little work in learnability, at which point his coat shifted, and I saw his name tag, Ryo Yoshinaka, one of the most important figures in the field today. Story 6. Way too late for anyone to see this, and it wasn't so much overheard as said to me. I was flying alone, and this little girl, maybe 5, wandered down the aisle and said hello. I asked where her parents were, and she said they perished, and a police officer was flying with her to take her to her aunt. My brain was not able to conjure any response at all apart from, sorry. She asked if she could look out my window, so I moved over to the aisle seat and let her, me continuously looking for a cop that she might be traveling with. She then told me how her parents were driving back from a party last week, and their car got pushed off the road by a truck into a tree. She was quietly crying while telling me this story. Suddenly I hear, "Oh, there you are," from the aisle. There's a woman standing there. The girl says, "Hello, Mommy," and leaves with her. What a little psycho! Nah, it just sounds like a little girl's imagination going wild, and she then worked herself up and started crying after imagining it actually happening. I'd be more concerned if it were an older kid. Source? Me. Parents. To me, this sounds like the beginning of a movie of one of those little girls or little boys that end up turning evil, or they turn up being like the Antichrist or something like that. Do you think this was the beginning of a narcissist or a psychopath, or was it just someone with an overactive imagination? Story 7. On a charter flight from Goa to the UK. "He's taking ecstasy, and he has a knife in his bag," said an old couple to the stewardess, referring to me. I said, "I don't have a knife. I'm taking Valium. I just want to go to sleep." Stewardess believed me and moved the couple. To be fair, you were coming from Goa. On the other hand, taking X on a flight sounds like it would be a terrible waste. And I'd be up all night partying, clothes still covered in colored chalk from Holly. Was an entertaining flight. You gotta keep your knife, right? Well, of course.
Please like and subscribe if you've made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
Story 8. Pilot accidentally left the intercom switch on. The whole plane heard him say, "Ooh, that's weird." Nothing else. Plane took off amid varying levels of anxiety throughout the cabin. I'm here to tell the tale today, so thankfully it wasn't too weird. Captain and FO were probably laughing their butts off. "Hey Bob, watch this." Accidentally. That jerk. One time I was on a plane, and the pilot accidentally left the intercom on. He said to the co-pilot, "You know, what I really need right now is a coffee and some moral spicy time." So that stewardess goes running up to the front of the plane to tell him that the intercom is on, and I yell, "Don't forget the coffee." Story 9. A guy coming home early to bust a cheating wife. He was on the plane with a friend/family who told him the other guy was at his house and they didn't expect him back until the next week. Happened to me. I got rebooked on an earlier flight and came home about 5 hours earlier than expected. Wasn't my wife yet, just my fiancée. Worked out the best for me. We both knew it wasn't working out anyway. She then married the guy, and he treated her terribly. Turns out he had a cargo ship of psychological problems he kept well hidden. It took her several years to get the divorce to go through and get their finances untangled because he dragged it out as long as he possibly could. Confucius say if man steals your woman, the best revenge is to let him keep her. Story 11. Everyone is boarded, and the plane is in the middle of the taxi when a kid about 10 seats up and on the left side, I was on the right side, starts crying and screaming at the top of his lungs, "I need to poop," and "I'm going to poop," over and over again until the seatbelt signs came off. I've never seen so many worried faces and the look of panic as the mother picked up the kid and bolted to the toilet. I was sitting behind this cute toddler and her dad one flight, and while we were landing, she wouldn't sit down. She was turned around in her seat staring at me. Her dad was calmly telling her to sit down while we land, and she looks me straight in the eyes and goes, "I can't. I'm pooping." Story 12. Not so much what he said, but I sat next to this fully grown man that was playing Plants vs. Zombies the whole 3-hour flight with incredible enthusiasm. Every time a plant got eaten or he defeated a difficult zombie, he'd jump in his seat, pump his fist, and aggressively whisper, "Yes, yes, got him, yes." To be fair, that game rocks. And so do illicit substances, apparently. Yeah, I wasn't mad about it. Guy looked like he was having the time of his life. This brings me back when I spent hours on a hotel toilet playing that game. I thought I was going to have my legs amputated when I came to. Story 13. A 5-year-old boy once said, "Dad, can you ask them to pull over so I can go to the toilet?" Oh, that's adorable. I once overheard a kid who must have been 8 or 10 ask his dad, "How long would the layover be?" Dad, 2 hours. Boy, "But how long is that?" Huh? Story 14. Nothing too crazy. A couple in their 50s who were all over each other, like tongues in ears, hands in pants. They were busy working out the logistics of their next getaway. They were both cheating on their partners and laughing at how gullible their significant others were, believing another business trip would come up so soon. Partners were probably thinking, thank frack they're going away again, and then proceeded to invite the other lovers around. Their other lovers being peace and quiet from an awful spouse. Story 15. I overheard a passenger passionately arguing with their seatmate about the correct way to eat a slice of pizza with chopsticks. What is the correct way? Edit. Wow, this is my most upvoted comment ever. Thanks for the fun responses, people. You don't. Not with that attitude. Not at that altitude. Story 16. I am a pilot for a major airline. Decades ago, I was running for a deadhead flight home and managed to snag the last seat. A mother and young daughter were seated next to me. Halfway through the flight, the mother, seeing my disheveled look after flying all day, asked if I wanted her daughter's PB&J sandwich that she wasn't going to eat. I politely declined, but she insisted. That was the best peanut butter and jelly sandwich I'd ever had. This is my favorite one of the entire thread. Story 17. I was sitting next to a father with his small child. The child wouldn't stop hopping around until the father said, "Sit still and be a good boy, or the plane will crash because of you and we will end up expiring." Never seen a kid so quiet before. Nothing better for helping your child decide to behave than saddling them with the responsibility for 100 or so strangers' lives. Story 18. The lady beside me told me that she was farting a lot, and she didn't care about telling me because she wouldn't see me again. I wish I had that woman's confidence. I respected her game. Story 19. There was this kid that was behind me that kept telling her dad she lost her tooth, and the dad was disgruntledly trying to find it, and some guy nearby said, "Hey kid, I hear if you lose your tooth on a plane, the tooth fairy gives you $50. To which the dad replied, "Hey, look, sweetie, the tooth fairy decided to sit next to us on the plane." Story 20. Sat next to a college guy who, while drinking some alcoholic beverages, started crying and telling me he unalived his best friend in a drunk driving accident. Because he had good lawyers, he got off 2 jail terms. He was sobbing and drinking. When we landed, I made sure he was not driving. Imagine an hour after landing, you see him again, and he goes like, "Hello, I'm your Uber driver." Story 21. I was sitting next to a teenage boy and his dad. The kid was telling his dad how much he loved the song Sexual Healing by Marvin Gaye. When the kid was finally done talking, the dad just looked at him and said, "You're a virgin."
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.